Jewish culture is the culture of the Jewish people from the formation of the Jewish nation in biblical times through life in the diaspora and the State of Israel. Judaism guides its adherents in both practice and belief, so that it has been called not only a religion, but an orthopraxy. Not all individuals or all cultural phenomena can be classified as either secular or religious, a distinction native to Enlightenment thinking. Jewish culture in its etymological meaning retains the linkage to the land of origin, the people named for the kingdom of Judah, study of Jewish texts, practice of community charity, and Jewish history. The term secular Jewish culture therefore refers to many aspects, including religion and worldview, literature, media and cinema, art and architecture, cuisine and traditional dress, attitudes to gender, marriage and family, social customs and lifestyles, music and dance. Secular Judaism is a distinct phenomenon related to Jewish secularization, a historical process of divesting all of these elements of culture from their religious beliefs and practices. Secular Judaism, derived from the philosophy of Moses Mendelssohn, arose out of the Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment, which was itself driven by the values of the Enlightenment. In recent years, the academic field of study has encompassed Jewish studies, history, literature, sociology, and linguistics. Historian David Biale has traced the roots of Jewish secularism back to the pre-modern era. He and other scholars highlight the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who was dubbed the renegade Jew who gave us modernity by scholar and novelist Rebecca Neuberger-Goldstein in an intellectual biography of him. Today, the subject of Jewish secularization is taught and researched at many North American and Israeli universities, including Harvard, Tel Aviv University, UCLA, Temple University, and City University of New York, which have significant Jewish alumni. Additionally, many schools include the academic study of Judaism and Jewish culture in their curricula. Throughout history, in eras and places as diverse as the ancient Hellenic world, in Europe before and after the Age of Enlightenment, in Al-Andalus, North Africa and the Middle East, in India and China, and in the contemporary United States and Israel, Jewish communities have seen the development of cultural phenomena that are characteristically Jewish without being at all specifically religious. Some factors in this come from within Judaism, others from the interaction of Jews with host populations in the diasporas, and others from the inner social and cultural dynamics of the community, as opposed to religion itself. This phenomenon has led to considerably different Jewish cultures unique to their own communities. History. There has not been a political unity of Jewish society since the United Monarchy. Since then, Israelite populations were always geographically dispersed, so that by the 19th century the Ashkenazi Jews were mainly in Eastern and Central Europe. The Sephardi Jews were largely spread among various communities in the Mediterranean region. Mizrahi Jews were primarily spread throughout Western Asia, and other populations of Jews were in Central Asia, Ethiopia, the Caucasus, and India. Although there was a high degree of communication and traffic between these communities, many Sephardic exiles blended into the Ashkenazi communities in Central Europe following the Spanish Inquisition. Many Ashkenazi migrated to the Ottoman Empire, giving rise to the characteristic Syrian Jewish family name Ashkenazi. Iraqi Jewish traders formed a distinct Jewish community in India. Many of these populations were cut off to some degree from the surrounding cultures by ghettoization, by Muslim laws of dhimma, and traditional discouragement of contact with polytheistic populations. Medieval Jewish communities in Eastern Europe continued to display distinct cultural traits over the centuries. Despite the universalist leanings of the Enlightenment, many Yiddish-speaking Jews in Eastern Europe continued to see themselves as forming a distinct national group, Yehudi, for the biblical Hebrew, but adapting this idea to Enlightenment values. They assimilated the concept as that of an ethnic group whose identity did not depend on religion, which under Enlightenment thinking fell under a separate category. Konstantin Maciuka writes of a differentiated but not isolated Jewish spirit permeating the culture of Yiddish-speaking Jews. This was only intensified as the rise of Romanticism amplified the sense of national identity across Europe generally. Thus, for example, members of the General Jewish Labor Bund in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were generally non-religious, and one of the historical leaders of the Bund was the child of converts to Christianity, though not a practicing or believing Christian himself. The Haskalah combined with the Jewish emancipation movement underway in Central and Western Europe to create an opportunity for Jews to enter secular society. At the same time, pogroms in Eastern Europe provoked a surge of migration, in large part to the United States, where some 2 million Jewish immigrants resettled between 1880 and 1920. By 1931, shortly before the Holocaust, 92% of the world's Jewish population was Ashkenazi in origin. Secularism originated in Europe as a series of movements that militated for a new, heretofore unheard of concept called secular Judaism. For these reasons, much of what is thought of by English speakers and, to a lesser extent, by non-English speaking Europeans as secular Jewish culture falls in essence. The Jewish cultural movement that evolved in Central and Eastern Europe, and subsequently brought to North America by immigrants. During the 1940s, the Holocaust uprooted and destroyed most of the Jewish communities living in much of Europe. This, in combination with the creation of the State of Israel and the consequent Jewish exodus from Arab lands, resulted in a further geographic shift, defining secular culture among those who practice traditional Judaism is difficult, because the entire culture is by definition entwined with religious traditions. The idea of separate ethnic and religious identity is foreign to the Hebrew tradition of Am Yisrael. Gary Tobin, head of the Institute for Jewish and Community Research, said of traditional Jewish culture, "The dichotomy between religion and culture doesn't really exist. Every religious attribute is filled with culture, every cultural act filled with religiosity. Synagogues themselves are great centers of Jewish culture. After all, what is life really about? Food, relationships, enrichment. So is Jewish life. So many of our traditions inherently contain aspects of culture. Look at the Passover Seder, it's essentially great theater. Jewish education and religiosity bereft of culture is not as interesting." Yaakov Malkin, professor of aesthetics and rhetoric at Tel Aviv University and the founder and academic director of Mater College for Judaism as Culture in Jerusalem, writes, "Today very many secular Jews take part in Jewish cultural activities, such as celebrating Jewish holidays as historical and nature festivals, imbued with new content and form, or marking life cycle events such as birth, bat mitzvah, marriage, and mourning in a secular fashion. They come together to study topics pertaining to Jewish culture and its relation to other cultures, in Havuro, cultural associations, and secular synagogues, and they participate in public and political action coordinated by secular Jewish movements, such as the former movement of Free Soviet Jews, and movements to combat pogroms, discrimination, and religious coercion. Jewish secular humanistic education inculcates universal moral values through classic Jewish and world literature and through organizations for 4. Social change that aspire to ideals of justice and charity. In North America, the secular and cultural Jewish movements are divided into 3 umbrella organizations: the Society for Humanistic Judaism, the Congress of Secular Jewish Organizations, and Workman's Circle. Philosophy. Jewish philosophy includes all philosophy carried out by Jews, or in relation to the religion of Judaism. The Jewish philosophy is extended over several main eras in Jewish history, including the ancient and biblical era, medieval era, and modern era. The ancient Jewish philosophy is expressed in the Bible. According to Professor Israel.Judaism, the principles of the Jewish philosophy start in the Bible, where the foundations of the Jewish monotheistic beliefs can be found, such as the belief in one God, the separation of God and the world and nature, and the creation of the world. Other biblical writings that are associated with philosophy are Psalms that contains invitations to admire the wisdom of God through his works. From this, some scholars suggest Judaism harbors a philosophical undercurrent, and Ecclesiastes that is often considered to be the only genuine philosophical work in the Hebrew Bible. Its author seeks to understand the place of human beings in the world and life's meaning. Other writings related to philosophy can be found in the Deuterocanonical books such as Sirach and Book of Wisdom. During the Hellenistic era, Hellenistic Judaism aspired to combine Jewish religious tradition with elements of Greek culture and philosophy. The philosopher Philo used philosophical allegory to attempt to fuse and harmonize Greek philosophy with Jewish philosophy. His work attempts to combine Plato and Moses into one philosophical system. He developed an allegoric approach of interpreting Holy Scriptures, in contrast to literary interpretation approaches. His allegorical exegesis was important for several Christian church fathers, and some scholars hold that his concept of the Logos as God's creative principle influenced early Christology. Other scholars, however, deny direct influence but say both Philo and early Christianity borrow from a common source. Between the ancient era and the Middle Ages, most of the Jewish philosophy concentrated around the rabbinic literature that is expressed in the Talmud and Midrash. In the 9th century, Saadia Gaon wrote the text Emun Oath Ved Oath, which is the first systematic presentation and philosophic foundation of the dogmas of Judaism. The Golden Age of Jewish culture in Spain included many influential Jewish philosophers such as Moses ibn Ezra, Abraham ibn Ezra, Solomon ibn Gabirol, Yehuda Halevi, Isaac Abravanel, Namanides, Joseph Albo, Abraham ibn Daud, Nissim of Gerona, Bafia ibn Pakuda, Abraham bar Hiyy, Joseph ibn Zadok, Hasda Crescas, and Isaac ben Moses Arama. The most notable is Maimonides, who is considered, beside the Jewish world, as a prominent philosopher and polymath in the Islamic and Western worlds. Outside of Spain, other philosophers are Nathanael al-Fayumi, Eliad el-Medigard, Jeddah ben Abraham Bedsi, and Gersonides. Philosophy by Jews in modern era was expressed by philosophers, mainly in Europe, such as Baruch Spinoza, founder of Spinozism, whose work included modern rationalism and biblical criticism and laying the groundwork for the 18th century Enlightenment. His work has earned him recognition as one of Western philosophy's most important thinkers. Others are Isaac Orobio de Castro, Tzvi Ashkenazi, David Nieto, Isaac Cardoso, Jacob Abendana, Uriel da Costa, Francisco Sanchez, and Moses Almosnino. A new era began in the 18th century with the thought of Moses Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn has been described as the third Moses, with whom begins a new era in Judaism. Just as new eras began with Moses the prophet and with Moses Maimonides, Mendelssohn was a German Jewish philosopher to whose ideas the Renaissance of European Jews, Haskalah, is indebted. He has been referred to as the father of Reform Reform Judaism. The Reform spokesmen have been resistant to claim him as the spiritual father. Mendelssohn came to be regarded as a leading cultural figure of his time by both Germans and Jews. The Jewish Enlightenment philosophy included Menahem Mendel Levine, Salomon Maimon and Isaac Seitanau. The next 19th century comprised both secular and religious philosophy and included philosophers such as Elijah ben Moshe, Hermann Cohen, Moses Hess, Samson Raphael Hirsch, Samuel Hirsch, Nachman Krochmal, Samuel David Luzzatto, Nachman of Breslov, founder of Breslov, and Karl Marx, founder of Marxist worldview. The 20th century included the notable philosophers Jacques Derrida, Karl Popper, Hilary Putnam, Alfred Tarski, Ludwig Wittgenstein, A.J. Isaiah Berlin and Henry Bergson. Education and politics. A range of moral and political views is evident early in the history of Judaism, that serves to partially explain the diversity that is apparent among secular Jews, who are often influenced by moral beliefs that can be found in Jewish scripture and traditions. In recent centuries, secular Jews in Europe and the Americas have tended towards the liberal political left, and played key roles in the birth of the 19th century's labor movement and socialism, while diaspora Jews have also been represented in the conservative side of the political spectrum. Even politically conservative Jews have tended to support pluralism more consistently than many other elements of the political right. Some scholars attribute this to the fact that Jews are not expected to proselytize, derived from halakha. This lack of a universalizing religion is combined with the fact that most Jews live as minorities in diaspora countries, and that no central Jewish religious authority has existed since 363 CE. Economic activity. In the Middle Ages, European laws prevented Jews from owning land and gave them powerful incentive to go into other professions that the indigenous Europeans were not willing to follow. During the medieval period, there was a very strong social stigma against lending money and charging interest among the Christian majority in most of Europe until the late 18th century, and in some places to an even later date. Jews were prohibited by Roman Catholic governments from owning land. On the other hand, the Church, because of a number of Bible verses forbidding usury, declared that charging any interest was against the divine law, and this prevented any mercantile use of capital by pious Christians. As the canon law did not apply to Jews, they were not liable to the ecclesiastical punishments which were placed upon usurers by the popes. Christian rulers gradually saw the advantage of having a class of men like the Jews who could supply capital for the use without being liable to excommunication, and so the money trade of Western Europe by this means fell into the hands of the Jews. However, in almost every instance where large amounts were acquired by Jews through banking transactions, the property thus acquired fell either during their life or upon the death into the hands of the king. This happened to Aaron of Lincoln in England, Esmond Arablitas in Navarre, Heliot de Vesoul in Provence, Benveniste de Porta in Aragon, etc. It was often for this reason that kings supported the Jews, and even objected to them becoming Christians. Thus, both in England and in France, the kings demanded to be compensated for every Jew converted. This type of royal trickery was one factor in creating the stereotypical Jewish role of banker and or merchant. As a modern system of capital began to develop, loans became necessary for commerce and industry. Jews were able to gain a foothold in the new field of finance by providing these services. As non-Catholics, they were not bound by the ecclesiastical prohibition against usury, and in terms of Judaism itself, Hillel had long ago reinterpreted the Torah's ban on charging interest, allowing interest when it's needed to make a living.